Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland on the north coast of France in Normandy. And I am going to go across the Atlantic Ocean into the Caribbean to a little known island called Curacao. And I have on the show today an amazing journalist, Mr. Brett Redmayne-Titley. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for having me on your show.
Hey, listen, just a little bit of an introduction. Brett and I talked a couple of days ago by video, and it just wasn't quite there. And so we talked for almost an hour, and got to know each other, and decided to do this interview. But with my ADSL, my third world, 1980s phone technology here in France where I live, we decided to go audio. So no video today, but you have a really nice voice, Brett. You really should do more radio journalism. You got a great voice.
There'd probably be more money in it, yeah.
Let me tell you a little bit about Brett and how we met. He spent his formative years in Australia, Ghana, and the Bahamas before turning 14 years old. He has since experienced 56 countries. Since turning his attention to world politics 12 years ago, he has authored more than 190 in-depth articles for many of the best alternative news services, many of which have been republished and translated for international publication. On-scene reporting has been his passion, and his reporting has included live reports from such events as the Keystone XL pipeline, the 2012 DNC convention, Hezbollah, and the 2018 Lebanon election, the 2016 Trump campaign, and many more. Brett's work is regularly featured at the UNS Review and for research on globalization. An archive of his articles can be found at his website, Watching Rome Burn, and it's exactly as you read it, Watching Rome Burn. Oops, I lost the. Hang on, I got to go back. WatchingRomeBurn.uk, and I love his logo. It says Watching Rome Burn. Video sed non credo, and if remember my high school Latin, that means not believing, right? Right, Brett?
That's very close, Jeff. Actually, I think the correct translation is I don't believe it.
Oh, okay, I see it, but okay, got it. Listen, I don't know where. I'm just so happy to have Brett on the phone. He's really got a tremendous body of work out there, and I don't, Brett, I can't remember where it was. It on if the Greenville Post posted you, but somebody, I got, I'm a journalist, and so people are constantly passing me stuff, and yours popped up, and I read your article about the color revolution in the United States with the presidential elections, and it was so good. And I mean, I was just like, man, this is really excellent. And I got to contact this guy. I'd love to have him on my show, and that's how it happens. So, Brett, please tell us a little bit about about your growing up and your arc of awareness. About Empire. I assume, like me, you probably grew up. Maybe not. You probably grew up brainwashed like me, and then you peeled the onion over the years. But how did you get to the point where you said seeing is not believing?
Well, my first memory of my experiences that drew me into political awareness was the Gulf Woodland disaster in Australia in approximately 1972, going from memory here, in the Pine Gap issue. Pine Gap was an American-backed intelligence facility in the middle of the Australian desert, and because Gulf Woodland was a nationalist, he wanted to stop that effort that was primarily from the Americans. Americans, and they overthrew the government. That's something that was not really revealed until much later. You may recall the movie The Falcon and the Snowman. The book actually goes into that in some great detail. So it's now established history that the Americans, or at the behest of the Americans, Gough Whitlam was taken out as Prime Minister of Australia under very specious circumstances. I was only about 11 years old, but that started a very strong inspiration for me, especially in lieu of my travels, where I started seeing more and more of the American empire, putting its fingers into the political situations in many countries. And of course, this, like I said, is in the late 60s, early 70s. I think for most observers and for your listeners and viewers, they're well aware that only continued to become a more American influence around the world as we see today. Obviously we're now seeing that influence in the American election, but prior to that we've had Venezuela. Just this past year, we've also had Bolivia. And my article about the color revolution is basically to suggest very strongly that color revolutions have now come to American shores.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I think it was, I can't remember if it was his letters or his diary. I can't remember, but George Orwell, who has quite controversial, whether you're on the left or the right. But he made a comment, I think it was maybe his first novel, Burmese Days, where he said that, empire always, in order to maintain control of the national population, the brutality and the violence of empire, colonialism and empire must be imported back into the home country to maintain control. And is that what you're seeing in the United States?
Yes, that's what I was suggesting in my article that you're referencing. It was very cursory in terms of my analysis of color revolutions because I intend to go more into that in greater detail in subsequent articles. But I think it was important that the American reader realize, as you've suggested, Jeff, that it has indeed come to American shores. And if you look at the use of color revolutions around the world, they have all started with an election, a national election, being contested on a razor-thin margin, and then one side contesting it, and then there being intervention by the national government. And of course, that's a very lengthy list that I need not go into, I guess, again. But Venezuela being an example, Bolivia being the most recent one. So yes, I think that it has come to American shores, and Americans need to be very cognizant of this because if it's not exposed for what it is, America likely will suffer nearly the same consequences as we've seen again and again in other countries.
Yeah, and if we broaden that definition a little, you can look at Belarus today. With all of the election being contested there, and then I actually go back all the way to 1989 with the Tiananmen Square protests, where at least that was the model that Gene Sharp used from the. He was basically a CIA cover hiding behind the Einstein Institute. But that whole book about civil disobedience and protesting elections, and he had that whole playbook that he developed to overthrow countries that were and are not obedient vassals to Western Empire, and it's been incredibly successful as you go back through the decades. I mean, isn't it amazing?
Well, yes, it is, but I think there's been a bit of a shift in the American focus prior to the color revolutions being sort of denoted as such. That's a modern modern term that's now used. Initially, as you know, especially in Latin America, South America, America was very anti-communist and by extension anti-socialist. And I would suggest that socialism and communism are actually mutually exclusive. Today, really, what you're seeing is that America just just doesn't like any resistance against its own hegemony in those foreign countries. As long as they have the political powers at bay, they're happy to let the society continue on. But those powers generally are very mercenary, very capitalistic, and very predatory upon their own countries, which is fine for America. But what America basically sells is the ability for those dictators or elected officials who act as dictators to continue to operate as such, under American approval. When those political leaders run afoul of America by not kowtowing to the American foreign interests, that's when America routinely steps in. And I think that's when the definition of color revolution has actually been brought to bear as not being necessarily anti-communist, not necessarily anti-socialist, but just purely anti-American.
Yeah. I read somewhere back, I can't remember where it was. Of course, there was, General Smedley Butler back in the 30s who exposed the the fascist plot to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. But somewhere in all that researching, I remember reading that, and one of his famous comments was, I was a muscle man for United Fruit Company and Dole Pineapple and all that in Latin America, and one of the he was a U.S. Marine general, and he one of his and I read that from 1920 something to I can't remember where it was, the 1990s, something like the United States intervened militarily in Latin America 6,000 times. I mean, it may have just been a boat. It may have just been a platoon of Marines. They may have occupied, a small area, or they may have overtaken an entire country, or whatever. But that 6,000 times, like in the last 100 years, does that sound like something you've researched?
Well, I'm familiar with Smedley Butler and what he had to say, and I do agree with it. What I think he was pointing out was the greater picture is that American foreign policy started becoming beholden to corporate interests more than national interests, and of course that's certainly true today. The other point that I think, in keeping with the Smedley Butler example, is that revisionist history, and America has been very good at this, has hidden people like Smedley Butler and what he had to say from popular discourse or modern discourse. And this is very true of a number of different subjects. Revisionist history, and you pointed out Orwell, he spoke about this as well. But the revisionist history has hidden America's foibles from the modern discourse. And, in alluding to, color revolution, Smedley Butler, other things of that nature, and of course, that's a very, very lengthy list. A lot of that is eliminated from the discourse. And I would suggest that the media plays a dramatic role in that. And that role is also to propagate that mythology that America is somehow sacrosanct from discussion.
When do you think in U.S. history, I mean, we could go back to the 1500s with colonialism, but European colonialism, but just specifically with the U.S., when do you think that this kind of this transition from nationalist interests in terms of geopolitics, which started out with the Monroe Doctrine, but when did it quit being when did it quit being so nationalist and it became more and more corporate or private the big corporations? When did they really start having such a huge effect on U.S. foreign policy?
Well, that's a good question, Jeff. And of course, that's a very lengthy answer that could go back all the way to things like Bretton Woods, etc. For me, I think the short answer is the collapse of the Soviet Union. When America no longer had the sole focus of anti-communism because the Soviet Union had, functionally collapsed. I think some of us would argue that the Soviet Union collapsed reasons, of which you're seeing America starting to be, its society being degraded, which is the priority of the militarism at all costs, as opposed to the propagation of its own society. So yes, for me, using just one example, I think that the in 1989 fall of the wall is really what started the whole chain reaction of corporate interests now looking at a globalist interest, and also enticing the foreign national corporations as becoming part and parcel of the American corporate interests as well.
In well, first off, I actually had to get a map. I mean, I kind of sort of knew Curacao was in the Caribbean, but and I know there's a drink called Curacao. But just, tell us where you are in the Caribbean and a little bit about Curacao, and then I'd like to ask you a follow-on question.
Sure. Well, Curacao is right off the Venezuelan coast, so close that you can actually see Venezuela from the island here on a very clear day. It's approximately 40 miles away. So when you see it, you don't see the coast. What you see is basically it rises to the mountains right off of the coast, as many countries do. So you're seeing the mountains just beyond the coast of Venezuela. As such, especially in terms of the very poor economy in Venezuela, a lot of that I would say is the result directly of American intervention. There's a very strong Venezuelan population here. Interestingly, there's about 5 different languages that are spoken here. Dutch being the predominant one, because the Dutch were the ones who settled what is basically the Caribbean Antilles back in the slave trade era. So Dutch has remained a strong language. You have Papiamento, which is the island dialect, which is basically a combination of French, Dutch, Spanish, etc. And then, of course, you do have Spanish, and that comes from the Venezuelan influence or influx, because many people have taken the time to come over for their own economic interests to Curacao, where opportunity is indeed better. Although this is still in certain shades an impoverished country. It's trying very hard to move into the capitalist methods of things, but that capitalist method has left a big portion of their population behind. So you do have dramatic poverty here as well. I would suggest that one of the problems is that, talking previously about American influence is extremely strong in the Netherlands. You can see this from the OCPW reports, the MS-17 reports, these kinds of things where, Holland has not been objective in that. But some of the influence here in Curacao, I think, trickles through the Americans, through the Dutch in Amsterdam or what have you, the leadership of the Netherlands right here to Curacao. One important thing that took place recently was that the Americans did very, very strongly try to place 5,000 troops here on the island in a preparation, presumably, for some kind of action against Venezuela. And the Curaçaoan government refused to do that. So,
oh my God, when did that happen, Brett?
That's in the last 6 months.
That. Oh my gosh. 5, that is a division, 5,000 troops. That's unbelievable. Amazing.
Yes, it didn't make
Go ahead. Tell us about that. I never heard that. That's a scoop.
Well, in fairness, I hadn't heard about it either, and I'm kind of a news junkie just like yourself. I heard about this from the local people that I've met here. I've been here basically 2 months now. I'll be here for another month. The short story is that I've come here to get away from the virus issues, which is a whole nother subject in and of itself. But society here is predominantly normal in terms of the virus. There are masks, but they're not required. The lockdowns that they have had have been discontinued. So Curacao is going in the right direction. But in meeting people here, that was one of the things that they told me, is that it was quite the story of controversy. As an example, the popular president is currently in jail, a little bit like Lula was in jail in Brazil. He was charged with different crimes and was put away right prior to the last national election. The current president is much more beholden to the Dutch government, and is not, because of that, as popular with the people in Curacao. I'm told that in the lead up to the election, and the election was within the last year, there were huge protests against the current president. And apparently the president, so I'm told, has become a little bit fearful of his people on some of his political and international foreign policy decisions. And that's what, sort of forced the issue on him not allowing the 5,000 troops to come to Curacao. The population was vehemently against it. Of course, and keep in mind that there is a very strong Venezuelan population here. Most of them are illegal, but that doesn't mean that they're not vociferous in their opposition.
Yeah. That's incredible. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, even Telesur, I never heard of that in Telesur. Which is the Venezuelan Alba, the socialist group of countries have their own television website, and I refer to it every day, Telesur, and they never mention that. That's amazing. So the president got thrown in jail. It sounds like the good old frame up to get rid of someone who's not in your back, who's not in the West back pocket. Does it sound like he was framed up to get rid of him?
That's what I've been told. I've got to be honest and say that because I'm new to Curacao, I don't know all the subtleties, but I'm involved in the water polo community here, being a former water polo official. People know that I'm a journalist, and they have shared their personal opinions. And their personal opinions is that, yes, it was a degree of, I wouldn't say frame up, but shall we say exaggerated charges being used for political gain. And apparently he in their minds was more popular than the current president. And of course, that's indicated by the apparently very strong protests that took place. There was tires being burned in the streets, huge gatherings apparently, right after the most recent election. So I think that speaks to a degree of dissatisfaction by the public about the current president. Interestingly, as well, there's been an influx in Dutch military presence here, not dramatically, mostly in intelligence. Two associates of mine from water polo, interestingly enough, are in intelligence for the Dutch government. Of course, they're very mum about what their role is, as they should be, I would argue. And but I think it's they're happy to admit that they've been recently brought here to increase, if you will, an intelligence effort here on the island. And I think that's a substitute for the 5,000 troops, in a sense, monitoring Venezuela. They say they're not necessarily following Venezuela, but I'll leave others to read between the lines on that.
Amazing. Well, by the way, just for fans out there who didn't catch it when he was when Brett mentioned MH17, that Holland, the Netherlands, you may notice as the Netherlands or Holland is very much under American imperial influence. MH17 was the Malaysian airline jet that crashed over Ukraine, and as far as I'm concerned, the whole investigation has just been a complete and total farce. And then the other one that he mentioned was is OCPW, right? OCWP. It's the Organization for Chemical.
OPCW, Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons.
Yeah, chemical weapons, and they've had some very, I think, bogus reports, about supposedly, the Syrian government, killing its own people, and it all seems to have fallen apart now with whistleblowers coming out and saying it was a bad report. So I just wanted to mention MH17 and OPCW because Brett mentioned them during his talks. So what's exciting you like right now? Like you're writing. I know you you saw that excellent article you wrote about the elections in the U.S. and the fact that it seems like a color revolution with the election being stolen by the Democrats from Trump. What else? What are you writing about now? I mean, what's got you excited as far as journalism, geopolitics, etc.?
Well, right now it is the American election, Jeff. I think there's no bigger story in the world right now, unless you're a Democrat. But
well, let's talk about that. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, Trump is. I was very disappointed, although China finally came out and accepted Biden's victory, according to the Associated Press. And the mainstream media. What do you think? Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I'm my head is spinning from all of the news, and I've got something going. In fact, I'll have to talk to you. I'm getting 3 other writers, Raman Mazaheri, Amir Khan, and T.P. Wilkinson are going to do. Or I'm hoping we'll do podcast readings of their articles about the elections. And if you want to publish your article on China Rising and do a podcast reading of it, I'd be happy to include yours too, because your article was outstanding. So what's going to happen? I mean, I agree. It's almost addictive. It's hard to keep thinking about it. Tell us what you think's going on and how it's going to end up.
Well, I wrote an article, and at the risk of tooting my own horn, what the article was about was the use of the Electoral College. Most people are very unfamiliar with the Electoral College because it's very rarely come into play in a U.S. election. Of course, most people do know about 2000, where it came into play to a degree, but it's never been used to overturn an election necessarily. The machinations of it were crafted by the founding fathers as a method to, if you will, what's the right word to use here? To not necessarily allow for mob rule, because they were cognizant of the fact that current events could create a situation where an is swayed just by the impetus of the sheep moving in one direction. What was interesting about the article is it's picked up a great degree of traction, not necessarily my article, but the argument that I presented, that the Electoral College could be used by the various states to decide that they no longer want Biden to be the anointed president per state. I think that's the bigger issue right now. The article you referred to was really about what's taken place just in the last week since the election. This article was written before the election, at the time when Biden was being assailed for his alleged criminality, or at least duplicity of loyalty, in his pay-to-play scheme with his son Hunter.
Yeah, with his son Hunter. Yeah.
I suggested in the article that those allegations were at least worthy of investigation, but beyond investigation, which could happen at the congressional level and the senatorial level, it seemed to me that can be used also in the Electoral College, should a state, and we're seeing this now, as you're seeing states such as Georgia that are becoming very, very outraged about the fact that their election has been manipulated in favor of the Democratic candidate. Using Georgia as an example, Georgia was to say, and we'll leave the speculation out about the count and things like that. That's another matter, the recounts that are going to take place, et cetera. But if Georgia still remained for Biden, but their House of Representatives decided that they no longer want to have Biden as the anointed candidate because of the fraudulent nature of the election, it is very much within their power that their state legislature will indeed decide to cast their electoral votes for Trump. And if you look, there's also a machination.
It's Republican controlled.
Well, actually, Georgia's not that much Republican controlled. I think their governor is a Republican in name only. But as you look around the country,
the House is. I think the House is, as I recall. I think Georgia's legislature is pretty solidly Republican, so they could send 16. Go ahead.
So that's true, yes. But I think the bigger point is a one of objection. And this is a point about the Electoral College that very, very few people understand. First, the election has to be certified, by the Electoral College in each state. That takes place by definition on December 14th. And that's open to public view. Which is interesting because the public is waking up very quickly to the fact that this election has not been, necessarily carried out in a legitimate fashion. So on that date of December 14th, it is possible that public opinion can be brought to bear upon the electors, and therefore they could change their mind. Okay, the electors are actually individuals. They're generally appointed as just quid pro quos for political party patronage, and in the past that hasn't mattered. There has been a move in recent years to make it so that an elector cannot jump ship. Has to vote the party line. However, they're not obligated to do so, and no state has a criminal penalty for it. There's things like just reneging on their vote, changing their vote back to where the political party feels it should be. What also is very interesting is that it then has to go and be certified in the House of Representatives, and that takes place on January 6th. Once again, the dates are all fixed, on the calendar by constitutional decree. On January 6th, it is within the Constitution that any state can object to the choice of the candidate, using just any state that you like. But if one state decides to object, and they have to object on constitutional grounds, well, certainly constitutional grounds would be a fraudulent election, or a fraudulent tally of an election. If they object on constitutional grounds, you have to, by constitutional law, have a separate joint hearing of both houses of Congress to address the constitutional issue. And that's if one state does it. Everything comes to a grinding halt. And you can't certify an election until all 50 states have had their chance to declare their ballots or their electoral college as being certified. So if one state does it, or two states, or three states, or what have you, then there will be a very, very large international news story about American politics coming to a screaming halt.
How does that work then if the Republicans gained, I think, 15 seats in the House of Representatives, and now it's like 212 or something to... but I know the Republicans gained like 15 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and depending on the recount in Georgia, would have a slim majority in the Senate. How would that vote work if it actually went to both houses of Congress? Is it by 50 one more vote than the total number, or is it 2/3 majority, or how does that work?
Well, that's a very good question, Jeff, because it's actually something that historically has never been answered.
That's unbelievable.
However, no, it's actually a very interesting question, because on Unn's review, which, as you mentioned, I'm one of their stable of writers. When the article came out on Unn's, the comments section in Unn's tends to be a lot more academic. Comment sections in some of the publications is nothing but stone throwing and ad hominem attacks. Certainly, that's to a degree the case with Unn's, but the people who take the time to read Unn's for the academic presentations, which I tried myself to craft, got involved in that. Some dismissed the whole argument out of hand, but some people got very much involved in what I was trying to suggest and looking at the answer. It appears that the answer is this. If in fact it was to go to a vote, and that vote would actually be in the House. When that vote takes place, it would not be by the representatives of the elected representatives, the elected congressmen, congresswomen. The vote would actually be per state.
Electoral college. Oh, per state.
Yes, per state. So that's why the machinations of the Electoral College would be very, very important per state, because if one state decides to object, and that's a different series of proceedings. But if it did actually go to a vote, Biden would not be the president, Kamala Harris would not be the president. What you would have would be a vote, and that vote would not be by the congresspersons themselves, it would be by the state. And this is why I believe, and thanks to the excellent comments that were given to the UNS piece, I believe that is the answer. And of course, with the substance of the Biden allegations regarding pay to play while he was vice president applied to the very fraudulent nature of this particular election, I think that the reader can see that there's a very strong likelihood that this election may go a different way.
So are you saying then that the vote would be 50 votes?
Yes, 50 votes.
State? Wow.
By state, yeah.
Then in that case, there's more red states than blue states.
Exactly. And that was a point that was made to me by one of the people in the comments section who weighed in, very nicely and very academically in digesting what I had previously suggested. Because to be honest, I didn't know the answer. And as the other very good commenters digested my presentation, I personally feel that they hit the nail on the head.
Well, send me the link to your one about the Electoral College, and I'll add that to the to the blog page on China Rising Radio Sinoland. So, do you think? So how do you? I mean, Paul Craig Roberts is just coming out with lists of fraudulent stuff, and I mean, I have pages of evidence, and then the one where the guy the postal worker who said that he was he exposed corruption, and then the Washington Post came out and said he recanted, and then he came out and said, no, I didn't recant. I mean, it's just like, it is just the worst propaganda on the side of the Biden side, the BBC and New York Times and Washington Post and all of the major television stations, even including Fox, except for Tucker Carlson, who they can't seem to shut up. But what do you see? I mean, how do you see do you think that Trump will have the money and the resources to get this corruption brought to the forefront so that they will be forced to do a recount? Or do you think he's just going to stall and go with the Electoral College like you talked about?
No, I think it's a two-pronged attack and both sides can't be discounted. In deference to PCR, Paul Craig Roberts, who's one of my colleagues at UNS, and quite frankly, I have to thank him. He was very instrumental in bringing my piece to bear with some of his readers as well. Some of the allegations are somewhat picayune. They're not going to, as much as they might be 100% true in the grand scheme of turning this election around. And please, I would like the listeners to understand, I am not a Trump fan. I am not a Biden fan. I am, bipartisan in my critiques of political elements in America completely and always. However, the smaller issues are not likely to come to bear in any substantive manner that would overturn the election. The legal elements can certainly do that. As in a piece that I'm preparing right now, the difference in votes, and I'm going from memory here, of Wisconsin, Georgia, let's see, there was a total of 4, but if you will, it was 86,000 votes.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania. Yeah, but if you put it together, it was only 86,000 votes. Is it possible that Trump can garner 86,000 votes through technicality and illegal maneuvers? Yes, I think that is indeed possible. If you look at Wisconsin and what took place on that night alone, that could easily go beyond the 20,000 vote difference that it has today. If you look at what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did in basically circumventing its own legislature, by allowing for votes to be counted after the due date for the votes, You must read Samuel Alito's basically a dissent on it when he crafted an opinion forcing an emergency order to bear. It was some very, very strong language, and that's very unusual for Supreme Court justices. Usually, most of them are very metered in their presentation, even if they're not particularly pleased with what it is they're overturning. So this sends some strong indications that the Supreme Court is willing to entertain other arguments regarding voter fraud, and we'll see where that comes into play. But I think that's somewhat mutually exclusive to the argument about the Electoral College. Certainly, as I said, within the machinations of the courts, yes, Trump has the possibility of overturning the election, but also in the Electoral College, Trump has that separate possibility of doing the same.
That's amazing. Well, I know that the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney General, William Barr, for the first time in U.S. history, allowed the Office of Election Fraud in the Department of Justice to actually do their investigation before the inauguration. It's always been done after, like in February, March, to address any claims that, when it was, ex post facto, cross the Rubicon, can't go back and change it. But he actually has now allowed federal prosecutors to start their investigation of the because he said evidence of or substantial evidence of fraud, et cetera. So do you think that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, having the opportunity to do their due diligence before January 20th or 21st of the inauguration, do you think that might have an impact?
Well, it will if Barr is sincere, but if you look at Barr, he's had every opportunity to go after the power players in the DNC that have been after Trump with the Russiagate investigation, which was absolutely fraudulent. Let's be honest about this. Once again, I am not a Trump fan, but that was just absolute hyperbole at the very least. Then you have the impeachment attempt, which, even if you looked at the impeachment attempt by the Democrats, it was a very tepid attempt at impeachment. There was certainly other things that could have been brought to bear against Trump if, in fact, they were sincere. I wrote a lengthy piece on that as well. I would encourage maybe the listeners to find that piece in my archive. But Barr is an interesting case study for that reason, that he's been suspiciously very reluctant to take the very substantial allegations in other matters and bring them to bear with DOJ. So suddenly, through the impetus of this election, he's now suddenly willing to do this at the 11th hour. I would argue that Trump is now starting to act like the president that he promised to be 4 years ago, only by necessity. You look at his foreign policy decisions as far as bringing the troops home now, getting rid of Esper. If you see, I think his name is McDonald or McDouglas, the retired military colonel who's now taken over as acting defense secretary. There's a wholesale change in Trump's demeanor as far as being the populist or the nationalist that he said he was going to be. And I would, as I just said, I think that's only by political necessity, if not survival, that he's trying to do this now. But in making those mistakes, he's surrounded himself with people that have been very duplicitous in their allegiance to their own president. And I think you could make that claim about Barr.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. Well, I can't stop keep watching it. I mean, it's just so unbelievable. And I'm a registered Democrat in Oklahoma, but it's that's so I can vote in the primaries, because if you're not a registered voter, you don't get to vote in the primaries. But there's a lot of things that I like about Trump, and there's a lot of things I dislike about Trump. I think he's doing a wonderful job of bringing down Western empire, whether he realizes it or not. So I rather like the fact that he's such a, he's really got the deep state, sort of, maybe not on their heels, but at least keeping them second guessing.
Well, the
So,
secondary viewpoint on this, I would argue, Jeff, is that the DNC has absolutely shot themselves in the foot with the voter by having no platform other than anti-Trump. They've not
yeah.
offered anything but a very, very loose set of assurances based on the Green New Deal or what have you, or placating Black Lives Matter, to entice the voter to vote for Biden. Now, Biden's obviously a very, very flawed human being. The media plays into this dramatically because Biden's 40 or 45 years in politics has been covered up, and his track record, or voting record, indicates what the man really is all about. The example of the three strikes laws, minimum sentencing laws that were brought to bear by Biden himself. How can an African American voter in good faith vote for Biden if in fact they would know that? But by extension, I think what's happened here is that Pelosi, by willing to literally use the pandemic to hurt the economy, by using Black Lives Matter and Antifa to create havoc in the streets and to condone these things, publicly condone them, and get the Democratic governor base to do exactly the same thing, has alienated a huge portion of the American Democratic constituency from their own party. And you're already seeing this with now that Pelosi is now trying to maintain power again as Speaker, and she almost went out on her ear 2 years ago for somewhat the same reasons, because you had an influx of sincere Democratic candidates brought to bear in the House. Now the House is, as well, it was predicted that they were going to gain seats in the House. They certainly did not. They lost, I believe, 12 seats. So this has been a debacle
12 to
of
15, yeah.
Yeah, whatever the number is, but they certainly lost. They didn't gain. The Senate because the senator from Alaska, he prevailed. So now the Republicans do, as of I think it's yesterday, have 50 seats no matter what. It looks like they'd at least get one in Georgia, probably two. And so there goes Pelosi's entire game plan completely right out the window. And on top of that, she's managed to alienate not only the voter, but also a huge portion of her own political Congress, from her viewpoint.
Yeah.
She needs to be thrown out. She does. And because she's not serving the interests of the American public, and certainly not serving the interests of the Democratic voter. Is she serving the interests of the DNC? Oh, absolutely. And there lies the problem. The DNC needs to come under great scrutiny by the Democratic voter to realize what these people have been up to, not just only this year, but 4 years ago with the Clinton debacle, whereby if you refer to the WikiLeaks revelations of just days before the election, it proved that the DNC was not following the will of the American people. And that's probably the kindest way you could put it.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I really appreciate about Trump, is that he has literally just ripped the mask off of the Democratic Party and Democrats in the United States in general, and as just being, wing D of the, global capitalist transnational party with wing R. I mean, they're hiding behind FDR's New Deal, and hiding behind LBJ's Great Society, but since 1980, I mean, they have just become just as neoliberal and just as neocon as the rest of the leadership in the United States. And so I do want to thank Trump for just completely exposing them for who they really are these days. What do you think?
I think what you're saying is true, but the biggest problem, and I think this is maybe the bigger point that's been made in this particular election, is that the media has now been exposed collectively, and that includes Fox News, who has previously been dramatically for Trump. It's exposed, the media, and that's not just mainstream media. This is alternative media, a world that I've existed in now for 12 years. I can categorically state that that alternative media predominantly is just as bad as mainstream media. But the public has woken up to this, and that's why, at the risk of plugging UN's review or possibly Global Research, they've taken a different viewpoint on this and have tried to be more metered in their approach, if not bipartisan in their approach. And I think that's one of the reasons those particular news services continue to grow. The public is anxious, very anxious, for good quality news. I mean, we need a return to Walter Cronkite, for God's sakes. But this has become the bigger issue. And, aside from whatever takes place, even if Biden does prevail, there's a huge portion of America that is no longer going to be interested in their standard news service. They're going to start gravitating to better news services, and I think that's very, very important because, as Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful tool that you can use to change the world. And speaking just for myself, I completely agree with that statement.
Well, for years I've been calling it the big lie propaganda machine, and the BLPM, and yeah, that's also been exposed. I mean, the whole thing. The problem is that the media, at least in the West or in non-socialist communist countries, is pretty much owned by the 8 to 10 transnational corporations. They're embedded with the CIA and MI6 and NATO, and what's so frightening now is that they're censoring. They are censoring, hundreds of thousands of social media accounts. They're shutting down channels. They're blocking people. Google is playing with their algorithms to shut people out. So that's what's worrisome is that people may try to gravitate towards that alternative media. I know they already shut down Ron Unz's Facebook account, didn't they? And Facebook and maybe Twitter. I can't remember. I know he lost one of his big accounts, social media accounts.
Yeah,
so
it was Facebook.
Yeah, and I'm just worried that the whole thing's just going to slide into just a dystopian totalitarianism. It's kind of spooky, to be honest.
Well, but this is, I suggested when we briefly spoke the other day, if the reader/viewer wants to really digest what's taken place, this has been, what you just said has been admitted to. The recent book that came out in July called COVID-19: The Great Reset was written by Klaus Schwab. Yeah, and Klaus Schwab is the founder and current director of the World Economic Forum. And for those who are just tuning into this, these are the biggest of the big power players in the world. These are the kingmakers. These are the people that control the media. These are the people that control politicians. These are the people that control militaries. And they like to have things their own way. And what's peculiar about the book is that even if you just read the preface, it's an absolute admission that they are going to use COVID-19 to affect their agenda. Now, whether they're successful or not is another matter, but have they admitted that there is an attempt to affect that agenda? Yes, indeed, they have. And I would encourage anyone who's interested to see if they can find a copy of it online, because it now has been removed because it created quite a degree of controversy when it came out in July. In fairness, it's a very, very well-produced book. It's very slick. It's well edited. It's an academic work. But do I agree with it? Absolutely not. And I think that anyone who's interested in personal free will and free choice should be horrified that these same power players, these kingmakers, are all in league trying to affect this stated agenda.
Yeah, the pandemic. Well, listen, Brett, this has been wonderful. We could talk for 5 hours, but if it goes over an hour, the listenership starts to go down, and because people just, when they see a podcast, they check how long it is first. And we've had a wonderful discussion, and we can always get back on together again, and and do another one. But I do want to try to keep them going over 1 hour, just to make sure that more people will click on it and listen to it. So much for being on China Rising Radio Sinoland, and I want to please tell the friends, fans, and followers out there your website again, and how they can read all your stuff.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. Yes, I'd just like to say that I'm not a blogger. I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. My website is watchingromeburn.uk. It's really just an archive of all my work over the last 12 years. And I would encourage the readers to go and see it. I'm proud of my work. I like to think that I do good work, but I do it on behalf of the reader.
And then you will also send me well, I already have your link. No, I have your link about the color revolution, but you said you had one about the Electoral College and then one about the impeachment, I think. But anyway, go ahead and send me a couple of 3 links that you think are related to the elections, and I'll add those to the page. How's that sound?
That sounds great, Jeff. Thanks for your courtesy. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and speaking to you today.
Yeah, getting to know you too, and if I ever have a chance to come to Curacao, well, you're leaving in a month. Oh well, anyway, I'm not going to get to see you in Curacao, but anyway, hopefully our paths. You and I have done a lot of traveling collectively, and hopefully our paths will cross in the future. Thank you so much for being on, Brett.
And thank you, Jeff. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye now.